There's been more than enough times in the last few months where the Russians have mocked him, demonstrated they have zero respect for him, and continue to increase what they're doing against innocent Ukrainians. And the president still fails to do anything. So what's really crazy here is that anybody thinks that he is going to do something serious. I think the only thing that will push him to action is going to be if the Republican Party,
Mm.
when they realize that they own this total failure of American foreign policy, that the senior Republicans in the House and Senate are going to be held accountable, and then they start putting pressure on Donald Trump. Otherwise, of his own accord, I would say zero.
Ben Hodges, who's a former commanding general of the United States Army in Europe. Hello to you, General.
Hey, John, how are you?
You're very welcome back to the program. And I'd also say hi to Kurt Volker, who was Donald Trump's former special envoy to Ukraine. Mr. Volker, hello.
Hi, great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you for rejoining us on the show. So, General, let me come to you first. I mean, do you believe we will ever see President Trump act against the Putin regime with meaningful, new, tough sanctions?
No, I have zero confidence that he will ever do that. Um, there's been more than enough times in the last few months where the Russians have mocked him, demonstrated they have zero respect for him, and continue to increase what they're doing against innocent Ukrainians. And the president still fails to do anything. So what's really crazy here is that anybody thinks that he is going to do something serious. I think the only thing that will push him to action is going to be if the Republican Party,
Mm.
when they realize that they own this total failure of American foreign policy, that the senior Republicans in the House and Senate are going to be held accountable, and then they start putting pressure on Donald Trump. Otherwise, of his own accord, I would say zero.
Zero. So, Ambassador Volker, what do you say then? The General says a zero
Yeah.
chance he thinks of Donald Trump acting of his own volition. What do you think?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Ben. I think that Trump does not want to do that. He's said many, many times he doesn't want to do that. He wants to do business with Russia, and he's just frustrated that Putin is not playing ball. And I agree. I think it's going to come from Congress. There's already draft legislation in Congress to tighten sanctions on Russia. There's supposedly 80 signatories in the Senate. That's quite a few. That's a veto-proof majority, and it's just going to take Republicans being willing to pull the trigger and push that through.
Right. So there's enough numbers in the US Senate to push through tough action against Russia. What about the House of Representatives, though, Ambassador? Because it's a slightly different situation there, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, you have a very, very narrow Republican majority, maybe one or two votes at this stage. But you have all the Democrats, or the vast majority of Democrats, who would vote in favor of tightening sanctions. So it only takes a handful of Republicans and the majority of Democrats, if that is the way that breaks. And there are more than a handful of Republicans who would vote for sanctions on Russia, including Joe Wilson, who has sponsored legislation to do so. So I think that it's doable, but everyone is wanting a signal from Trump that he's not going to oppose it,
Mm.
that they're not getting in his way. And so I think packaging this from the Senate or the House Republican side as a way of strengthening Trump's negotiating hand is the way to pitch it. But I do think the votes are there.
Right. So it's in the power of Congress to take the question of sanctions out of the president's hands, or at least run independently in the direction of tougher action. Now, General Hodges, in your view, then, when we try to look inside the mind of President Trump, is he an isolationist? Is he an appeaser? Is he both? Is he neither? What's your take?
Well, I think he is an opportunist who is looking for business transactions. He is not motivated by ideological purposes or any sort of a dogma. And so exactly what Ambassador Volker just said. I mean, he wants to get to business with Russia. And so it's a bundle of contradictions because they talk about China as the real threat, the long-term major threat to America, but the Chinese are looking and seeing that this administration, number one, seems to lack the political will to take hard action and enforce international law. And this administration also seems to be quite flexible on sovereignty, announcing that that Ukraine would have to give up territory to Russia at the very beginning of the administration. And so that would send a message to the Chinese that, okay, well, maybe this administration will be flexible on Taiwan as well. So it's difficult for me to put my president in a particular category, except that he is not motivated by any moral principle and is willing to sell out anybody that gets in the way of him getting some sort of a deal.
Well, tell me, General, what did you make of the president's address at the West Point Military Academy at the weekend, where he was telling those cadets that they were on a mission of annihilating America's enemies? There was no mention, I think, of honor or the defense of freedom.
Yeah, I graduated from West Point back in 1980, a very long time ago, and I am appalled at this commencement speech by the commander-in-chief. I mean, he mentioned none of those things that are taught or important to these brand new officers after they, became lieutenants upon graduation. And he rambled on about yachts and trophy wives and all kinds of bizarre things. And one of the most strange things was he said he turned it into a campaign sort of speech and said nobody wanted to join the Army when Biden was president. Every single one of those cadets entered West Point 4 years ago during the Biden administration.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's just his credibility. It's embarrassing, and this is bad for America. This is not about disagreeing policy. This is bad for American credibility.
Ambassador, that speech by the president at West Point Military Academy, it was quite revealing in a number of ways, wasn't it?
It really was. And he, in his second term, he has chosen to really do everything by himself. He has let go his national security advisor, doesn't think he needs one. He's now let go 100 more people from the National Security Council's staff. He is not listening to experts or seeking expertise, knowledge, guidance. He is speaking from his emotional side, from his sense of what he thinks, what he believes, the world, the way he sees it, which is why he often gets a lot of things wrong, as General Hodges just said. And this is, I think, the defining characteristic of the second term so far, is that by acting this way as president, he is generating lots of unintended consequences. He knows what he wants to do. For instance, he wants to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. through higher tariffs, but it is resulting in lots of other things like high interest rates and higher inflation and decreased economic growth that he hadn't counted on. And this is all due to the fact that he's just making this up all by himself.
Yeah, and Ambassador, while we're reading the mind of the president and his followers, it's pretty clear that the thinking of the MAGA movement has a lot to do with a kind of political and cultural affinity with Putin's hatred of liberal thinking, so-called woke ideology, isn't it?
I don't think they're connected to Putin. I understand what you're saying is that Putin is anti-woke, pro-traditionalism, what they portray through the Russian Orthodox Church as a conservative outlook on life. And maybe that is similar to a religious conservative view in the U.S., but it's really not connected in any way. What you have in the U.S. in this MAGA movement is an emotional sense that the country has gotten away from us through progressive politics, divided politics, wokeism, DEI, uncontrolled borders, mass illegal immigration, crime and drugs. And so there's just this anger and a desire to say, no, we've got to take everything back. And I think that's really what Trump has tapped into and why he has such a fervent following from his base, even though one can say that there's a lot of unintended consequences that are actually impacting people right now.
Well, indeed. I wonder, General Ambassador, if you could stay with us just for a moment, and we can just cross live to hear the president giving that address, the Memorial Day address at Arlington Military Cemetery. Let's just cross live.
This Memorial Day is especially significant as we commemorate 250 years since the first American patriots fell on the field of battle. 2.5 centuries ago at Lexington Green, Concord Bridge, Bunker Hill, brave Minutemen and humble farm boys became the first to give their lives for a nation that did not yet have a name. With their deaths, men like John Brown, 23, Samuel Hadley, 28, and Abner Hosner, 21, ignited the flame of liberty that now lights the inspires everybody and the entire world. Those young men could never have known what their sacrifice would mean to us, but we certainly know what we owe to them. Their valor gave us the freest, greatest, and most noble republic ever to exist on the face of the earth, a republic that I am fixing.
That is President Trump speaking live at the Memorial Day ceremony at Arlington Military Cemetery. Listening to that, the former NATO commander, General Ben Hodges, and Kurt Volker, former U.S. Ambassador General. There we have the president paying tribute to the fallen on the battlefield of America. What do you make of what you were hearing?
Well, he was reading a traditional sort of a Memorial Day speech that sounded appropriate. Earlier in the day, he sent out a tweet, or a truth that he calls it, and he says Happy Memorial Day, which is a bizarre greeting. Memorial Day is about men and women who were killed fighting for the country, so you would not say Happy Memorial Day. And then he turned it into a rant against the previous administration. So at least while he's standing there on the ground at Arlington National Cemetery delivering this presentation, that sounds appropriate. But what American soldiers want, they want to know that their leaders are going to be live up to their oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and that their leaders are going to do everything they can to make sure they never get sent into battle without having every advantage, and that we're going to have allies. That's what has always been the hallmark of American armed forces, is that we worked with our allies. And the president, unfortunately, has severely damaged relations with our most important allies, especially those in Europe.
Okay, last question, if I may, to both of you. You'll have seen the news, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz announcing that Ukraine will be free to use German-supplied weapons, and also from other friends, including Britain, with its longer-range Storm Shadow missiles at any range, so presumably into Russian territory. A brief word from you on that, General, if we would.
Well, long overdue. I'm glad to see that the Bundeskanzler is leaning forward on this, and now Ukraine has a better chance to protect their civilians. It is much better when we're talking about air and missile defense. If you can kill the archer instead of trying to knock down every arrow, that is a much better way to protect your civilian population from these Russian attacks. And so if they're able now to use Storm Shadow and Scalp and presumably Taurus against Russian airfields, this is a good thing.
Okay. Ambassador, a final word on this?
Yep, wholeheartedly agree. Long overdue. It was something that the Biden administration did not want to do. We denied Ukraine permission to use weapons at long range for years. Germans followed suit. And now it is really this frustration with President Trump, this inexplicable unwillingness to actually take tough measures against Putin, that I think has driven the Europeans to do more themselves. And frankly, that's a good thing.
All right. Ambassador Kurt Volker, General Ben Hodges, thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Now, coming up on Drive, the latest from the French Open tennis tournament, and some in the Conservative Party seem to be thinking about Boris Johnson again, maybe help them out of their slump in the polls. What do you think of that idea? Well, Times columnist Jenny Russell doesn't think a huge amount of it, as we'll hear, I think, in just a moment. It is 5:20. I'm John Pienaar, here with Drive on Times Radio.
The World in 10 podcast is your essential daily roundup of all the biggest stories from across the globe.
The world is getting more dangerous, and every day military specialists and the Times' correspondents help us understand it.
The most likely cause of a world war in the next 10 years. This isn't something you want to get mixed up.
President Putin will sow discord in the alliance.
Listen to The World in 10 to stay on top of the world.
Subscribe for free now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your preferred podcast provider.
This is the call of the chiff-chaff. This is the call of the willow warbler. Hear the difference? Thankfully, some things are obvious, like choosing Interactive Investor for your ISA and personal pension. With 30 years' experience, over 430,000 customers, and a rating of excellent on Trustpilot, the choice is obvious.